Hello, everybody. Thanks for attending this evening's webinar on protecting rights at work. My name is Sharon Boyce, and I am the President and Queensland Director of Physical Disability Australia, or PDA, as we most usually are known. It's wonderful to have you join us for this important and informative event. I'd like to begin on behalf of PDA by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands on which we dwell and to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. PDA also acknowledges people with disability, past and present, those who are living full and complete lives, and those who have needs that are not yet being met. We ask you to reflect on this and to work with us to bring about the changes that will give all people with disability an opportunity to live an ordinary life. Our guest speaker this evening is Joseph Mitchell, the Assistant Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions. In today's presentation, Joseph will be talking about the work unions are doing to ensure the rights of workers are upheld, particularly workers with disability. The Australian Council of Trade Unions is the peak body for Australian unions, made up of 38 affiliated unions who together represent about 1.8 million workers and their families. Since its creation in 1927, the ACTU has spearheaded some of the most fundamental workplace struggles in Australia's history. Without the work of unions and union members over the last 100 years, we wouldn't have many of the conditions we take for granted today. Before we launch into tonight's presentation, I would just like to run through some housekeeping. The presentation will run for about 35 minutes, after which there will be time for questions and discussion. Audience members have had their audio muted, but you can pop your questions in the chat as we go, or save them to the end of the presentation, and then you can put your hand up and do it that way, as long as we've got a chance to hear what your questions are. Joseph will be able to answer them. If you experience issues during the webinar, please let us know via the webinar chat. We are extremely grateful to Joseph for offering his time, knowledge, and experience. And with that, I'm going to pass over to you, Joseph.
Thanks so much, Sharon, and thanks so much to everybody for your time today. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country, which is down in Victoria, and like to acknowledge this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'd also like to begin with expressing a heartfelt thanks to PDA for having us on here today. PDA does amazing work, and we're really happy to be a partner and a supporter of the phenomenal work you do on behalf of your members and on behalf of all people with a physical disability. Your dedication to the rights of people with disabilities is absolutely commendable, and something that we're really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you today. At a really high level, just want to say that unions have always stood for the dignity and fundamental human rights of every single person. We believe that everyone, regardless of their background abilities, deserves to be treated with respect, fairness, and equality in the workplace and in society. We believe in a better Australia, a better world, and we want to make sure that that world is just. And so our commitment to those principles and the things that we do are completely in a line, where we continue to fight for a world where every worker can enjoy a secure, meaningful work, a living wage, and a secure retirement. We want to make sure that every workplace is an environment where every worker is treated with dignity and respect, and abolish barriers to participation, barriers to inclusiveness, and ensure that everyone is uplifted so that they can fulfill their creative potential. This includes advocating for things like stronger work from home rights, advocating for things like banning pay secrecy clauses, strengthening sexual harassment laws, as well as other laws that protect workers from bullying and discrimination to protect every worker. We're also committed to making sure that everyone has an opportunity to access a fair anti-discrimination system so that we can have more time and more ability in a costless way to seek justice against it when there's wrongdoing. We want to make sure that there are no barriers to entry for the workforce for everybody, and that's making sure that employers do their part, the law does its part, and unions do their part in ensuring there's fair access and equal opportunity. This means that we want to make sure that there is a fair and effective training, skilling regime so that every worker has good access to the education and training that leads to fulfilling and ongoing employment. We also want to make sure that there are reductions or the abolition of barriers like discriminatory wage rates for workers with a disability that mean that workers are discouraged from seeking work because they are not paid fairly for the work that they do and the creative input into the work that they do. We want to make sure that things like the NDIS and things like our health system are fair, accessible, cheap, and universal, so that everyone has the opportunity to get care whenever and in however form they need it, so that the barriers to participation in general society aren't up, and we get a better opportunity there. And things like ensuring that there is a clear and positive duty on employers to accommodate reasonable requests for flexible working arrangements, and making sure that there's procedural fairness there. I think lastly and most importantly, unions aren't advocacy vehicles that just talk to government for work. We aren't a spectator sport. We are a collective which is only as powerful as the will of its members. And the most important thing we can do and the most important way workers can show power and show strength and improve things is through direct action and through the collective bargaining system and the award system. And so every day there are workplaces and workforces that are taking action to improve rights at work for every single worker within them. That's making sure that we get fair wages, we get flexible work where we need it, we get accommodations at work and safe workplaces. And that's through the collective bargaining system, and that's through the fair work system. So we've been making sure that workers that are receiving things like minimum disability leave, more sick leave, more annual leave, and better flexible work arrangements so that you can do your work from where it suits as well. We want to make sure that we do the best that we can as well as unions. And so we are always open to and hopeful to work with organisations like yourselves to make sure that unions are doing the best that they can as well, because we can all do better. And so, again, really appreciate the opportunity to have a sort of inclusive and wide-ranging discussion today. But absolutely glad to be joining with people that share a common vision for a fairer and better and more just Australia.
We've had a number of things come in. And the first question is, I could really use some additional things at work to make it easier for me. A closer car park and a better setup with my monitor. I'm afraid to ask though, is this something that the union could help me with?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that unions can help you with. And this is something that unions are absolutely well placed to work with. So first of all, employers have an obligation to ensure that there are reasonable accommodations for workers to provide an inclusive workplace. And this includes things like preventing discrimination, harassment, providing reasonable accommodations, and ensuring fair pay. What we seek as a result of the work that we're trying to do is ensure that we enforce that. So it's one thing to ask and it's one thing to seek and hope for these requests, but it's another thing to make sure that they actually occur. And so working with your union can be a really powerful way to ensure that everyone has a stake in making that workplace better and more appropriate. An employer isn't allowed to treat you with less dignity or with less rights, and the union is there to make sure that you've got enough people at your back to feel as supported as you possibly can to get those reasonable accommodations.
It's so hard to find and keep a job when you have a disability. Are unions doing things to help make this easier? That's an interesting one.
So if you're already if you're already a member of a union, and if you have a union in your workplace, you may have a workplace delegate. One of the really important things that we have won in recent industrial relations changes that were fought for and won by unions over the last few years has been the right for every workplace to have a union delegate. That is a elected representative of workers from a union. That means that you have a person that you can go to that should have a deeper and more and a more knowledgeable source for enforcing your workplace rights. So the first port of call is your workplace delegate. If not, then you should always call your union. Like we have we have enough people that are on the phones and available to you to help you understand what you can ask for, what's reasonable, and also how to get what you're after as well, and what is unreasonable from an employer's point of view, and what's unreasonable for an employer to refuse.
I'll hop into the next one, Sharon. This one.
Yeah, you do question 2.
Yeah, this one's from David. Sometimes people with disability are afraid to speak up about bullying and harassments, or being denied workplace adjustments, things that help them do their job. Afraid for fear that I'll be cast as a troublemaker or sacked. How can unions help in this situation?
Look, thanks so much for that question. And it's absolutely something that we know that workers with a disability fear. But it's something that all workers fear as well. And that's without suggesting that it's not acute for workers with a disability, but it's also something that everyone has to grapple with, which is it is really hard to ask your boss for things. It is really also hard to say no. Those are the two hardest things to do in a workplace, and that's the purpose of unions, to make it so that you're not standing alone. So the purpose of getting together with a union and joining a union is so that you don't have to ask those questions alone. One of the really important things that we all do is making sure that all of these requests, whether they're making reasonable accommodations for workers with a disability, whether it's making sure that we're bargaining for work from home rights, whether it's making sure that we're bargaining for extra time off work or leave arrangements, all of those things are not just going to be beneficial for workers with a disability. It can be workers who are also along the journey of who are also sort of don't have a disability. And I think that's part of the goal of the union, is to ensure that everyone has a stake in improving the rights and conditions and wages of everybody in the workplace. So like a lot of my answers will be, your strength is found in the power of the collective, and it absolutely is, but it's something that we're all invested in, because if the boss divides us, then we are all weaker. And we want to make sure that we're all stronger for it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of synergies between what unions are doing and what we as PDA are doing. We're there to stand up for the rights of our membership and try and make things better for people living with physical disability through collectivism and action and representation, which is essentially the same thing that unions are doing. So there really is a lot of synergies there. I'll move on to the next question. I encourage everyone in the audience to pop through questions as we go. These are some that we've received ahead of time. This one is from Nathania. How can I get more information about what my boss should be paying me? I haven't had a pay rise in a while, and I'm not even sure if I'm being paid the right superannuation. That's from Nathania.
So you should be the information where you should be getting your pay and where your pay rights come from are either in a collective agreement, a contract, or an award. In some cases, your wage might be the same for a couple of years in a row because your contract hasn't changed or your collective agreement is expired. But if you're on an award, you should be receiving annual pay increases. So it's a really reasonable thing to be questioning why you haven't received a pay rise and whether or not you're getting the right superannuation. The first port of call is, you should have a union for your industry. And if you're not already in a union, you can call the contact center and ask them to help you figure out what your pay arrangement is. And then they can also help you figure out which instrument you should be getting paid under and whether or not you're getting paid the right amount. When it comes to superannuation, it's a little bit harder to figure out whether or not you're getting paid the right superannuation, but it's all contained either within your EBA, your contract, or your award, which your employer has to follow. And if you've been underpaid, or if you've been underpaid superannuation or wages, then you have the ability to go with your union to the Fair Work Commission to initiate recovery of those. But it's a really important question to ask, and something that you should be comfortable with raising with your union. And if not your union, then going to somewhere like Fair Work to be able to see whether or not those instruments are being followed appropriately. But the Australian Union's website is a really good starting point for all of this.
Terrific. Thanks, Joe. There's another question here from Mary Ann, who's interested in your views on the supported wage system. And I think that's the old ADEs and so on.
So the supported wage system is an unjust system. We believe that every worker should have access to fair wages and should have a fair minimum wage. The national minimum wage is a minimum wage which is appropriate for all forms of labour, and we believe that if you're a worker with a disability, you should be getting paid the national minimum wage. We have supported people with disability, which is obviously a partner and sister organisations to yours, that has led advocacy in the Fair Work Commission to abolish the supported wage system, and we provided many submissions in support of abolishing the supported wage system, and we're encouraged to hear that it was seen to be an unjust system by the Fair Work Commission and is being phased out. We don't want to see anyone being exploited because of the nature of their disability. We want to make sure that if you do a fair day's work, you get paid a fair wage. The minimum wage is already hard enough to live on. It should not be worse for a person with a disability.
So true.
Let's see. It's one of the
Wanna
other.
go? Can you hear me all right now, guys?
A bit better now. Thanks, Sharon.
Okay, I've moved rooms, so I hope that that's better. I've got the third question here that has come through, and it's so hard to find and keep a job when you have a disability. Are unions doing things to help make that easier? And you already started to answer that with the end of that last question. So could you answer that one for us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard to keep a job with a disability, and it's often due to the way that employers treat workers with a disability by refusing to make reasonable accommodations. And it's something that we're really concerned about. The first point is it's often hard to get a job with a disability. We see that people with a disability get discriminated against, that workplaces are inaccessible or unsupportive of making the accommodations to allow workers with a disability to work there. And that's something that we need to see changed. And by advocating for and recently winning changes to anti-discrimination law, making it easier to access and limiting adverse cost orders, these kind of things are going to help access to justice for workers with a disability from even getting access to the job market. The second is keeping your job. So, if your disability progresses, if you acquire a disability through any means, injury or whatever, or through a health event, your employer should be required to make reasonable accommodations, and it's something that we want to make sure occurs. So that there's 2 or 3 ways that we can do this. The first and the most important one is by making direct representations to employers through bargaining or through negotiation. And that's where we're bargaining for things like disability leave, we're bargaining for things like reasonable accommodations, work from home opportunities, where that's appropriate and where that's available to the industry. These things all should make it easier. The second thing is making sure that we improve the skills and training system. So skills and training is an amazing opportunity to acquire new skills, to improve your own productivity, but also to access new job opportunities, especially as industries change. But the skills system has been stagnant for about a decade. and often not evolving with the technology of the time, not having enough funding through TAFE, or not having enough, not having a good enough tie to the jobs market. And so doing things like campaigning for the establishment of Jobs and Skills Australia should hopefully revitalise the skills system, and advocating for things like free TAFE should hopefully make it easier to acquire new qualifications to ensure that you've got not just the flexibility or the campaign to keep one job, but to have the flexibility of getting more jobs in more different areas. So these are the kind of things that we're really focused on as the union movement, to make things easier. But yeah, completely acknowledge that it is really hard out there.
Are there some linkages, Joseph, between the unions and the NDIS or the NDIA and some of the areas in, particularly in employment, some of the new, I guess, schemes and different ideas that are being talked about at this point?
Yeah, I mean, unions represent a lot of workers across the NDIS and the NDIA, and we're advocating for ensuring that if there's work available underneath those schemes, that it's dignified and accessible for all kinds of workers. And that's, a really important goal for us.
Such an interesting area, and an area that's being explored more and more. So I think that Physical Disability Australia would probably like to hear more about that and learn more about what we can do as members to support other members, and across all of those areas within government and unions. So yeah. Now we've got another question here. This is true as what we've just been speaking about, and the importance of when you have a disability, how some of those things, and keeping that job and having enough money and knowing what to do to make things easier, link to this next one. Everything is so expensive. Why is it worth paying union fees?
Look, that's a really common one. First of all, joining a union is one of the most important expressions of power and self-determination that every worker can do. It's an opportunity to join a collective that fights for better things, including wages, conditions at your workplace. When it comes to things being expensive, it's been really hard recently, but what we know is that workers in a union earn more than workers that are not in a union, because we're able to negotiate for better pay rises and fairer conditions. We know that workers in a union are more likely to be in full-time and secure work, because they are able to negotiate for better wages and conditions, and able to get their employers to recognise the importance of secure work. And finally, it's job security. There's nothing more powerful to help keep your job than joining a union. So you think about all the opportunities that your employer has to move you along, freeze you out. That's so much harder when you're a member of a union, because we are on the case and we are looking out for each other in the workplace, so that everyone's got a fair opportunity to get a fair day's work. The last thing is, sorry, I said the last thing again, but safety at work. Union work sites are safer work sites. And you might be working in a blue collar work site or a white collar work site. There are still places where you need safety at work, because injuries happen, exacerbations to existing injuries occur. It's something that we all need to pay attention to.
I'd probably supplement that too, Joseph, by saying there's a bit of a generational thing there, because it's without, as I think Sharon mentioned in the intro, without the work of unionists in the past, we wouldn't have things like the 8-hour day, maternity leave, superannuation, and it's also that.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a really long and proud history of fighting for fair and dignified work. And the people that occupied this seat that I'm in before me, did amazing things like campaigning for a 40-hour week, making sure it's on the employer to provide a safe workplace, winning equal pay and abolishing pay discrimination for women and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workers. It's really important that we continue the fight, though, because there are still inequities and unjust practices that are happening across Australia and across the world. The job's not done. So joining your union is joining a movement for change. one that affects your workplace directly, but also improves the quality of life for every worker across Australia.
Really good.
Questions are
That
really
answers that question, doesn't it? We should all make sure we join. Okay, now there are more questions in the chat. I think that we're going to have a look at those and then field them over across to you, Joseph. So does someone want to look at the chat and just read those out?
I can, yes, Sharon. We've got one here from Erin, and apologies, I missed these. I didn't realise there was questions in 2 different places coming through. And Erin is asking, our organisation supports people with Down syndrome to find roles. These employees would be across many unions in Australia. Is there a centralised union option, or do they do it from their own union and contact a certain person?
So people with Down syndrome work across industries across Australia, and the massive amount of diverse industries. So their union would be the one that represents the workers in their workplace and industries. And so that would be a number of them. In order to figure out which union you should be joining, the best place to go is to the Australian Union's website. And the simplest way to do that is just to type into Google, join a union. And it'll help you see the join page where you can sort of map out exactly what union you should be a part of. You can also call the Australian Union's contact centre, where we can talk you through exactly what unions are available to you in the industries that you're working in. But it sounds like you're doing incredibly important work, Aaron, and really happy to support you on that.
Fantastic. I've got another one here from Finn, who's asking about the resources I can read or share about reasonable adjustments to help educate others in my organisation.
So I think those will be available on the Australian Union's website again when it comes to reasonable adjustments. But if you can't find those, we should get in touch later and see if we can provide you something.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joseph. Maybe, Natasha, you could pop a link in there to Australian Unions, or I can in a moment. And Finn had a follow-up question as well. He's asking about disability leave. And could you tell a little bit more about this?
So disability leave is something that doesn't exist in law yet, but unions are keen to change that. So what we are trying to do is, across a number of industries and workplaces, bargain for disability leave. And that will be leave that is available to workers with a disability to take and to use for days that they require to attend to that disability. And so it would be a separate and new entitlement that sits along sick leave, because we know that people with a disability often drain their entire sick leave allocation really fast to attend to matters that are chronic or recurring. And that's just not fair. It means that you don't actually have sick leave when you get a cold, because you're dealing with matters that should actually have some kind of separate entitlement. And so we are working across a number of sectors and bargaining for that in a number of industries, so that it's actually fair, and that, you know, if you get a cold, you can take sick leave for that. You don't have to take annual leave, and more ongoing matters that deal with a disability that you have can be dealt with through disability leave.
I've actually had some involvement in the campaign there in the public sector workforce, and that's been a really hard-fought campaign so far, but it's starting to get results. We've got a lot of agencies. The entire ACT public service now has access to disability leave, and that's been revolutionary for a lot of people who are using annual leave and even long service leave.
Yeah,
to try and keep them at work to attend the medical appointments and things that they have, and it's really been quite interesting just hearing and talking to people who have suddenly had access to this leave, who were thinking about maybe having to give away work, that has now enabled them to stay at work. So that's something that I think, Joseph, you as well are very keen to have that rolled out nationwide into the National Employment Standards. So
yeah, absolutely. It's a really important goal for us, because it's about keeping people at work and ensuring that we've got that sort of dignity that comes with work.
Exactly. Now I've got another question here. This is an anonymous attendee. Can people who are housebound request from a new employer to work from home? If that is denied, is that something unions can help with?
If you are housebound, you absolutely can request to work from home from a new employer. It may not always be accepted because there may be conditions upon the work that you are required to do that require you to attend a workplace. So it's not going to be a universal yes, but it's also not going to be a universal no. There are workplaces where 100% work from home is available to employees that already work there, and so can be available to employees that already start there, that are looking to start there as well. And the union can help with cases of discrimination from not being hired to launch some adverse action case. So it's sort of not a universal yes, not a universal no, depends on the case, but absolutely is something that can be available in workplaces.
Fantastic. Let's see, we have another one here. This is getting a little bit political, maybe, but with an election around the corner, this person is essentially saying they're concerned about the opposition's proposal to scrap work from home rights, and they're wanting to know what can be done about that.
So, look, the election around the corner presents a really clear choice for working people. We've seen the leader of the opposition make some really pointed remarks about the issues he has with the newly won rights of working people. Some of the really important things that we've won in the last little while have been things like expanded rights to work from home, protection from adverse costs from discrimination, better rights to bargain, including multi-employer bargaining, so we can bargain across more workplaces as well as the right to disconnect. The coalition and Peter Dutton has already signalled that he's looking to unwind a whole bunch of these measures. So what the government wants to do to the public service to scrap work from home rights, to sack a whole bunch of public servants, is an indication of the way they believe employers should behave across the country. And it's a real worry, right, that we don't want to see a reduction in work from home, which has been transformative for so many people. Not only people with a disability, but you've got women, you've got people with caring responsibilities outside of work. These have been really important when it comes to work from home. Another one that he's promised to repeal is the right to disconnect. And that's something where you have the right now to not have any adverse action taken against you as an employee if you don't answer the phone or don't answer an email outside of work hours, because if you're not getting paid, you shouldn't be able to be contacted or held accountable for things that happen outside of work hours. This is also a protection for workers with a disability who can't necessarily do more work outside of hours, and for everyone really as well. So we're really worried that Dutton represents a significant risk to workers' rights. And we've seen things that I think are really worrying for people with a disability. So today, the employer lobby, the lobby group that it represents, big businesses and across a country, has argued for the change of the definition of the word small business in law. Now, small businesses right now are businesses with less than 15 people that work there. Less than 15 people, the business has less, workers have less rights at those businesses, frankly. There's less protections from adverse action, there's less protections from unfair dismissal, there's less protections from employers making reasonable accommodations, the right to disconnect. All of these things that exist in a lot of larger businesses don't exist in small businesses. And the employer lobby wants to expand the definition to capture 1 million more workers under the definition of a small business, which would be a business that employs up to 50 people. And if you employ up to 50 people, I don't think you're a small business anymore, actually pretty big. So this is a risk because Dutton hasn't been forthright in explaining exactly what he wants, but he's promised to be. government that is more friendly to the big business lobbyists than he is going to be to working people, and we're really worried about the promises that he's looking to make at this election.
Mm. Well, I think I might have come back online. First one, disappointingly, I missed that last point, but I'll catch up with it on the video. Or was there another one in the chat? I thought that there was a couple more that we could still ask, Joseph, if we've got a little bit of time.
Certainly are. Just looking back, if you've got something, Sharon, if you want to fire away while I just catch up with the list here.
Well, I can go into the chat and have a look and see what I can see, because we're looking at like different screens here, Joseph, which always is a bit exciting. But Paul, have you got one?
I have got one, actually. There's one that's essentially picking up on some of the recent media about all unionists are bikies or something, making the point that nurses in the union aren't bikies, and they're essentially, it looks like they're saying that it's a bit unfair to be characterising unions this way. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a lot of really bad media reports about the behaviour of some people claiming to be unionists, and I think it's I can't stress enough just how distressing some of that reporting has been, in particular where there has been violence and criminality, and it's something that unions don't stand for. So we are an organisation dedicated to uplifting and empowering working people, and the union movement has a clear set of values to ensure that we've got better opportunities for workers, not worse. And some of the reporting around behaviour at work that's been discriminatory against women, that's been parasitic against the rights of workers, is something that we're really distressed by and absolutely condemn. And it's why the union movement has taken a really strong stand against that criminality in the past, and still does. But it's not representative of the union movement at all. The nature of the union movement has changed enormously over the years. Australia, when it was a 70% manufacturing body, the typical union member, I mean, when women had much lower workforce participation, the typical union member was a bloke in a blue-collar industry, and it's just not true anymore. Our largest union is the Nurses Union. Our average union member is a 44-year-old woman in the caring industry with a bachelor's degree. These are the changing face of the union movement, reflects the changing face of the Australian economy as well, where we have greater workforce participation from women, a much more diverse workforce, and we have demonisation of unions from people in the coalition saying that all unionists are thugs. But that's so disappointing and discriminatory against a whole bunch of very dedicated people like nurses, teachers, firefighters, truck drivers, clerical workers, public servants, that do an amazing amount of work on behalf of their fellow co-workers, but also keep Australia going and have kept Australia going, including through the pandemic.
Point here.
So I think it's...
Sorry, Sharon, just quickly, a follow-up point here from the same person who's saying it's a bit unfair when employers effectively have their own unions, but just don't call them that and do the same thing unions do. That's interesting.
I mean, it's funny, right? Some of the best, most organised people in Australia are employer organisations where bosses stand up for each other. The CEOs are all friends. They often went to the same school, and they do whatever they can to support each other. And when that kind of class solidarity is exhibited through the very rich, they often decry that same kind of class solidarity when it's attributed to working people.
Exactly. Sharon, did you have something? I just encourage audience members to jump in. We've got a really good conversation going here. Is there any other points that you had, Joseph, while we're just catching up?
I think that the only other thing I wanted to raise is just that we really want to look to do more. So one of the really important things that unions have is that while we've had some really good wins, particularly around the last changes to the Fair Work Act, we know that there's a lot more work to be done. And that's something that can only be done together. So I've had a message of how important it is to join your union and be a part of that change. But in order to make that change meaningful and for workers of all types, in particular workers with a disability, it's really important that you join, you're active, and you're part of the movement for change.
Exactly. And there's another question here. Can part-time and casual employees join a union?
Absolutely, they can. Every worker, regardless of how you're engaged as a worker, has a union for them. So it doesn't matter if you're full-time, part-time, contractor, doesn't matter if you're an independent contractor, a gig worker, a freelancer, an actor, any kind of worker, an owner-driver. There are so many different kinds of workers that have unions for them. The most important thing, the only thing that you really need to join a union is to work, and that's going to be something that everyone does. So if you have a job, if you work for a living, there is a union for you.
Another question. We're really running out of time, but we'll probably sneak one or two more in. It's an anonymous question here. Is concerned about the rise of AI and taking away entry-level opportunities, which are often a pathway for people with disability into work. Is that, how much of a concern is that, and what is the union doing to address that?
Absolutely. Artificial intelligence is something that unions are absolutely paying attention to. Last year, the ACTU Congress, the union movement adopted its first artificial intelligence policy, which is a comprehensive set of beliefs and goals and that unions have to making sure that as technology changes, that workers have a place in it. And when it comes to AI, I think there are three big things that we need to think about. There's AI as it affects you at work, as a tool of work, and that might be things like the questioner is commenting about, how it replaces and changes tasks that that are done, changes work that is done, but also might augment existing workplaces that they work at. There's AI as a tool of management, where bosses use AI as sort of a hiring tool, a firing tool, a way to manage people's performance and output. And then there's AI as it affects industries. And so you think about if you're an educator, you have a whole industry where it has changed when your students start to use AI. Or if you're a journalist and you've got a lot of AI content theft happening, and you're suddenly not just competing with other journalists, other news organizations, you're competing with AI who's ripping off things like the New York Times to produce fake reporting, or you're a creative worker where often they're subject to wholesale theft. All of those sort of instances and iterations of AI are things that we're really concerned about. And as it affects workers with a disability, there are going to be a lot of challenges that we want to deal with as a union movement. And I think there are two examples. There's the one that the questioner highlighted, which is AI could significantly affect entry-level jobs, pathways into the workplace. And that's true. It could absolutely change the way work is done at the entry level, but it also might create additional opportunities as well. It's really hard to tell the impact of a technology before it's been rolled out. It could make things more accessible in other areas where AI is being used as a tool of work to expand productive opportunities. The thing that's going to make the difference, though, is whether or not workers are consulted and a part of the technology adoption. Workers are experts in their industries. They know the work that needs to be done, and often managers at 2, 3, 4, 5 levels above can't comprehend to the creativity and the knowledge and the input that you have to do to create the job that you do. And if workers aren't part of technology adoption at the workplace, then things will go missing, things will go wrong, and they'll go wrong quickly. I know, having been entry level, having been mid-level, having done work, that managers have completely misunderstood the kind of things that I do. And the amount of creativity and work that goes into getting the outcome that they think is relatively simple. AI can't replicate a whole bunch of jobs yet. There's a whole lot of hype from people who are selling things that we need to be skeptical of. And we will be doing things together to protect our jobs and to protect the work that we do, again, through the power of the union. The second thing is AI as a tool of management, and it has a demonstrated capacity to discriminate against workers. AI, especially when used for performance evaluation, when used for hiring or firing, and when used for surveillance, has a demonstrated capacity to discriminate against workers. You think about, Amazon, when it adopted AI in its hiring practices, it systemically discriminated against people of color and women when it's hiring because it used the resumes of all of its existing workers, which were white men, and said that they were the ideal worker, and so inadvertently discriminated against people when they were looking for a new job. That can occur a lot, and it can occur because workers don't have the visibility and transparency of the AI systems that their bosses are using, and that needs to change. Where employers should be required to be transparent and open about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and workers should have input into these processes. You shouldn't be evaluated on your performance by an AI who's using the CCTV camera up in the far left corner of the warehouse to look at your pick rates if you work at a Woolworths warehouse, and that be unfair against the kind of work that you have the capability and capacity to do. And that's something that, for example, the United Workers Union actually fought against and got some accommodations from Woolworths to ensure that people aren't going to be discriminated against by the performance management software in work. It's a new frontier of contest, and it's a new frontier for workers, but it's something that we're really conscious of, and we're trying to organise incredibly quickly around.
And many of us here tonight that sometimes it can take us just that little bit longer to do the same thing that our colleagues might do, but we do it just as well, if not better. And there's a real potential there for that to be used against us because we need to do things a little bit differently, and because the technology, if you like, just doesn't understand that as much as a reasonable human being does.
That's exactly right, and I think that when it comes to that pervasive, permanent surveillance and a performance evaluation that AI has the capacity to do, it's this very new challenge that we all have because it's just not normal. It would be very weird if your boss was standing right behind you at the computer all day, every day, but the AI has the capacity to do that. And so we need to figure out what's reasonable going forward.
And the AI doesn't build in the diversity, does it?
That's exactly right.
We mightn't say it's from like thousands or millions of different bits of information, but it does, as you said, look at the white male workforce that was there in Amazon is one very good example.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Have we got any final questions, Paul, or are we?
We'll squeak one more in. It sounds like it's someone working in hospitality who's concerned about it becoming like the situation in the US where you're working for tips. Actually, this might be the same person who asked if it was possible for a part-time or casual to join a union. It sounds like they might be off on the Australian Union site quite quickly. Essentially just making the point that they were concerned about where it's heading because of the levels of exploitation and mistreatment of people working in that sector.
Yeah, I mean, both my brothers are chefs. I was a waiter for 10 years before I joined the ACTU. The exploitation in the hospitality sector is absolutely rampant, and the United Workers Union that represents workers in hospo is doing a phenomenal job at fighting back against that kind of significant difficulty that occurs for a lot of workers. And we've seen big cases of wage theft from some of Australia's most famous restaurateurs, where they rip off their workers by making them work unpaid overtime, making them pay for breakages and denying them their basic workplace rights. But it's something that can only really be fought against in a union. One of the most important things we do every year at the ACTU is present at and fight for minimum wage increases at the Fair Work Commission. And something employers would love is if there was a differential wage for workers that have the opportunity to earn a tip. And we never want to see a worker rely on a tip from a customer to make ends meet. The minimum wage should be a living wage. It should be absolutely enough for you to get by without relying on what is essentially the unasked for gratitude of a customer that you've done really well by. So we want to see a fair minimum wage, and we're going to fight against any proposals from employers to undercut that and to undercut things like your penalty rates, and to make sure that we have a fair wage system, because you know what happens in America where they earn $2 an hour and need to make the rest off tips is just completely unjust, and we can't see that happen here.
Clear time there. So if anyone else has questions, please forward them through to the email address and we'll answer those for you. We'll also get some links to the Australian Union's site and maybe some other things which will circulate to registrants. So with that, I'll duck out and let you do the close. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you, Joseph, for not just answering those questions, but for actually giving backgrounds to all of them, linking them to disability, putting them in a real life context, and really making it something that hopefully everyone today enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed the way that we can actually make sure that we all engage with the union that will be the one that will work for us and with us. And we'll have, I think, a lot more strength, because often people with a disability become the voiceless, and they're often scared to actually ask the questions. They're not sure where to go. But this links to the union and to being able to have those answers and have that backing. So there's a real strength, I think, was something that really came out of this discussion and webinar tonight. So I really want to again say thank you, Joseph Mitchell, and thank you for everything that you do in your work as well, and for joining us tonight. PDA runs webinars throughout the year along with member events, so keep an eye out for all of those. And if you're not yet a member of PDA, I encourage you to sign up for our free membership by visiting our website, www.pda.org.au. That's a little bit of advertising for us. And a big thank you once again, Joseph, for giving up your own time this evening. We really appreciate you being with us tonight. And I hope everyone has a great evening. And I hope everyone keeps these thoughts in their mind. If you've got questions, as Paul said, send them in via email. I'm sure Joseph will be able to find the answers for us, and we can keep linking that journey and linking our work as people with a physical disability who absolutely want to be part of the workforce and want to have the supports and put those things in place to make things work better for all of us. So thanks again, everyone, for tonight. Thank you again, Joseph. Thank you, Natasha, for helping in the background with all of our stuff. Thank you, Paul, for all of your monitoring of the chat and linking in when my technology is failing. But thank you, and I hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks, everyone, for having me.